Hey everyone, Ted Wyman here from the Winnipeg Sun. I'm along with Scott Billeck, our hockey writer, and we are here to tee up Winnipeg Jets training camp, which gets underway on Monday. And it's going to be different from almost any training camp we've seen before. It's going to be short. It's going to
Yeah.
be sweet, and as everything is in 2021, it's going to go into a 56 game season, all in the Canadian division. And I see this as being a very intense camp in terms of competition for jobs. Scott, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's, roughly what, a 7-day camp essentially. I mean, it's a little more than that, but they have the first Saturday off after it starts next Monday. So you have Monday to Friday, 5 days, and then you have Sunday, Monday, and I think Tuesday along with it. So about 8 days of actual training camp, no preseason games, no real chance to kind of,
Yay.
really try. Yeah, well, yay for pretty much everybody, but I think for Paul Maurice, he would want those games to kind of get an idea. But at the same time, everybody's kind of in the same boat, so it is what it is. Um, but yeah, I would agree. It's going to be intense. There are some positions, I suppose, that still need to be filled, and there'd be some eager faces, come Monday morning when the teams actually hit the ice, or the team hits the ice, trying to vie for those spots. So yeah, it's going to be quick. It's going to be fast paced. I mean, any sort of injury or anything like that kind of derails a camp for guys, usually normally. So, and this is even more so. So it's a lot about staying healthy. A lot of these guys haven't really played any meaningful hockey in a while. So yeah, it should be interesting.
Yeah, it really should. And there are going to be specific spots that I'm seeing that are going to be particularly intense. And, you look at the top six is pretty much set for these
Yeah.
forwards. It's pretty darn good top six, one of the best in the hockey, no doubt. But then after that, really, I see Adam Lowry and Andrew Kopp as being the only guys that are pretty much locked into positions. And then there's a bunch of guys. You could maybe 10, 11 players who are coming to camp who are going to be competing to get those final four spots and then spots on the taxi squad up front. I really like the way that battle's shaping up because I think there's a lot of pretty good players there, including some prospects like Christian Vesalainen, and you've got Jansen Harkins, who had a good showing last year. And
Yeah.
with no Jack Roslovic here, and
Yeah.
injuries to, Brian Little's obviously not here. David Gustafson is injured. There's some spots open for guys that might not have had a chance to make this team. So I do want to talk about the defense as well, but just a quick thought on that forward group and what you expect to see, how you expect that to shake out.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like you said, top six is, kind of set in stone. Some combination of Kyle Connor, Mark Scheifele, Blake Wheeler, Nick Ehlers, Patrick Laine, and Paul Stasny. From there, I think the third line, 2/3 of it is set with Andrew Kopp and Andrew Adam Lowry, and then who plays on that right side. I don't know. I mean, I think it would have been Jack Roslovic, but there's an obvious impasse there with the team. He wants out of town. Who knows where that's going to go? I mean, that's kind of one of those, yeah, one of those situations. Again, the Jets seem to find themselves in that kind of. Well, I wouldn't say all the time, but it's happened a
Too
couple
often.
times now, and yeah, exactly. So, and then I think you have to start, looking at, Jansen Harkins earned I think he earned an opportunity to potentially play on that third line, but so does Mason Appleton. And so there's those two guys as well that are, that might vie for that third line. And then what happens if Trevor Lewis kind of hands? So he's their professional tryout contract. They have three guys. One's Jimmy Oligny. They know him from his Moose time with the Moose, and then another one, Cole Kaler, is a goaltender. So
Lewis is a guy with a lot of NHL experience.
yeah, well, that's the other thing. Two Stanley Cups with the Los Angeles Kings. And you look at his 6 goals, 6 assists last year in 56 games with the Kings, and those numbers aren't going to jump off the page. But here's a 33-year-old guy with a lot of experience. But the Jets have brought in veterans before, like Matt Hendricks and that sort of thing, who have been more essentially just kind of room guys. They're not really relied upon for anything. And I'm not saying Trevor Lewis gets a contract. He's on a PTO. He would have to obviously, show something that he can offer the team. But I think there is something there. I mean, this is a guy who can produce. He comes from a winning mentality. It's been some lean years in Los Angeles, but lately, but that's just the way it is when you put together kind of a bit of a dynasty like they had. So there is that, and he also, he checks a lot of the boxes on analytically, from what I was looking at this morning. He has a good pedigree that way as well. So I think those are the types of things that can actually, he's a solid bottom six addition, whether it's on the fourth line, whether it's on the third line, however that shapes out. I mean, they obviously signed Nate Thompson in the summer. Yeah, Trevor Lewis could give Nate Thompson a run for his money too. In a lineup as well. So it'll be interesting to see. I think, it's interesting. You don't always look at PTO guys, but this year's a little bit different because some of the PTO guys that are signing are actually, half decent names, and it's just because of the situation that we're in right now. If you look at the, other teams, St. Louis obviously has a big name there as well. But yeah, anyways, it's just one of those. I think Trevor Lewis is going to be one of the storylines to watch because it's not like he's done as a player. I mean, this guy is only 33. He's got, yeah, sure, he's got some miles on the tank, but he's a good player. So I think he'll be something to watch. And then, yeah, if that, it changes things. It helps out the bottom six. You still have Matthew Barreau in the fold. Your bottom six might not look, that horrible. And I'm not saying it's always looked horrible here.
Bottom six was Perreault, Trevor Lewis, and Nate Thompson.
Well, yeah, like
on the fourth line, because that they would be upset if you didn't have more of Mason Appleton
right.
and of Jansen Harkins, right? And Christian Vesalainen, for that matter. That's
Yeah.
always going to happen, but it would be a pretty solid line of NHL players.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly it. I mean, I think the fourth line, in more recent times in Winnipeg, this team's been a three-line team, and a lot of the time that fourth line hasn't done what it hasn't produced in the way that you would want it to. And you're not asking them to be 40 goal scorers, but you are asking them to contribute, and these lines haven't always done so. I think, if you can get Trevor Lewis, if he has a good camp, I think you go a long way to start, being more of a four-line team, which I think in this kind of sprint of a season that it's going to be, it's a lot of games. There's a lot of times where you're playing 3 games in 4 nights. I mean, these things don't normally happen in the NHL. But this year they're going to, because they're trying to cram in 56 games between now and May 8th. And so you're going to need, 4 lines to be running. So you're not, running your horses at the top too hard, and they're just getting, gassed out by, mid-year or at the end of the year. And then, you come into one of those situations again where you can't deal in the first round with, like, say, a St. Louis or whatever. You're not going to, obviously, that's not going to be the case this year because there is no central division for, well, the Jets at least. So yeah, but I think, it's important to, get those players. I think the Mason Appletons are going to be there. I think Jansen Harkin's going to make this lineup. But I think Trevor Lewis adds a different element to that bottom six that this team hasn't necessarily had in the last couple of years.
Yeah, that's a good analysis. Obviously, Cole Perfetti is going to potentially factor in here as well when he gets back for the World Junior. The same goes for Ville Heinola, the 2019 first-round draft pick who's playing for Team Finland at the World Junior. They're not part of this camp, so we won't talk about them just yet, but they are going to make things interesting when they get back. But that on defense, you've got a really interesting battle there. I think there's 15 defensemen coming to camp. There's a lot of prospects involved in that group. Dylan Samberg particularly comes to mind. Sami Niku, I guess, still technically a prospect because he hasn't really established himself as an NHLer yet.
Yeah.
And you've got, Logan Stanley. There's a few guys here who are going to come in and really compete for maybe a spot in the third pairing and for the next 2 spots, the next guy up kind of roles, and for the taxi squad. I mean, I see that as being a really intense situation, and even more so when Heinola is factored in.
Yeah, and I think that is interesting. I was just trying to pull up the roster here for it, because there are, like you said, a lot of defensemen. I think, some of them are kind of set in stone, the Neil Pionk's, the Josh Morrissey's, the Dylan DeMellos. But then, it's kind of, and even, Tucker Poolman will be in there. I think, it was going to be interesting coming in because you didn't really know exactly how they were going to kind of handle some of the young players. I think, this team has been itching to get Dylan Samberg into a pro situation. They like his size. They like what he does on the ice. That there's a lot of things that they like about Dylan Samberg that he does.
He's a true player, right?
Yeah,
He's
I
not
think so.
old,
Yeah, and
they're
and
already.
yeah, he's already older. I mean, it's not like this is an 18-year-old kid, like not unlike Cole Perfetti, right? So he's not just a green kid coming in to play. You have a guy who's filled into his body. He's kind of ready to go. And so I think he's gonna get a heck of a look, like a long, long look. And obviously in a short amount of time. But I think he's the one to watch. I think he can change the complexion of this defense. He can add that physical side, and they have in that top four. If you think, I mean, Josh Morrissey, Dylan DeMello, and Neil Pionk. I mean, who of those guys is this big bruising guy? And I'm not saying that Dylan Sandberg's coming in to be the next Dustin Bufflin, but he has some size to him. He is a big boy. He can lay a hit.
He fits what they
And then
need more than, say, Hanola does at this
I
point.
think so, but I think they also need a guy like Billy Hanel on the back end who can create a bit of offense. There's a lot of very defensive defensemen. I know Josh Morrissey can, play an offensive role, but I mean, based on what he has and what this team has, he's being asked to be very defensive. And fair enough, this team has been pretty bad defensively, right up until last year, and they got to, that's got to get better as well. But you would like to count on a little bit of offense from that back end as well, to kind of supplement what you have up front. So, yeah, I think I think Sandberg is the biggest one. Can he play in the top four? Will he get that role? Next to a let's say Neil Pionk, I suppose. Or does Tucker Poolman play up there? I mean, they do have Tucker Poolman and his size as well. I thought Tucker Poolman, might have been the best player on the ice for the Jets during the playoffs. Back in what seems like a year ago now. It's only
Not
half a
saying
year.
the Sun, unfortunately, but
Yeah, yeah. So, but it's interesting, right? So I'm interested to see the Dylan Sandberg thing is probably the biggest, storyline on the defense, and then kind of, what do they do with a Ville Heinola when he comes back from World Juniors? Here's a guy who's actually played meaningful hockey in the last 2 weeks, and most meaningful hockey, kind of since the playoffs are over. So it's interesting. It'll be interesting to see what he can do. He obviously showed great potential last year when he played for the Jets. I don't know. It was 8 games at least, I believe. Yeah, they didn't burn a year of his ELC. So, yeah, he played his games and he was good. I mean, there's a guy who stood out and took full advantage of an injured defensive contingent that the Jets had. So I think those two are the most interesting ones. Heimel will be interesting just because how late he comes back. By the time he gets here, the season's pretty much starting. By the time he gets out of quarantine. Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see, but I think Dylan Sandberg's the biggest thing, and then you got Tucker Poolman who probably plays in that second or third pairing role depending on how it shakes out, and then you have one other guy who kind of, and it'll be interesting. I don't think it's Logan Stanley unless he's taken a big step. I think,
what about Niku?
yeah, I mean it's interesting that when Kevin Shoveldayev talked about him, I mean a lot of us I think were taken kind of surprised by that during Shoveldayev's availability earlier this week, talking about how he kind of made a quip or a bit of a joke about the accident that kind of stifled Niku's season last year. But it's interesting that they still view him kind of in the fold. It's my understanding that they were trying to trade him, and obviously that hasn't come to fruition. So it'll be interesting to see. I know Niku wanted to stay here. He's obviously got, I think he has a kid here, a girlfriend, all that stuff. So it'll be interesting to see if they're going to
The
give
whole
him.
pandemic, didn't he?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like he's been
Yeah.
here, so it'll be interesting to see what they're going to do with him. What the plans are. I mean, is it just kind of smoke and mirrors from Shovel Day off, or do they truly see him as a guy who could maybe step in? He has some NHL experience, but he hasn't really played in the last year. So I think that's kind of, yeah, that's a bit of a knock against him. Well, would they go with a guy like a Lucas Sabitza instead? Because he has that kind of veteran, and Paul Maurice has often erred on the side of a veteran player. So yeah, again, like you've talked about earlier, there's a lot of storylines going into this, and I think
Yeah,
that second or that third pairing kind of plays out as also one of them.
and one player that you didn't mention was Nathan Beaulieu, who
Right.
obviously
Sorry.
an
Yeah. Yeah.
incumbent player from that third pairing last season, and a guy that can play a bit of a rough game. In fact, he was probably their toughest player
Yeah.
on the ice during the playoffs in a series against Calgary, in which they were pretty much manhandled. Um,
Yep.
I don't know, I don't think Nathan Beaulieu gets the fans too excited. I think they'd rather see one of the young guys in there,
So,
but he certainly is a serviceable player who can fill the holes and hold the spot for a while we wait for these very good prospects to be ready to play.
yeah, I agree. And I should have said him over Lucas Ibiza. Yeah, it is Nathan Beaulieu's spot, I think, to kind of lose. But I think they like Beaulieu because there's not a lot of toughness on this team. If you look at the top of the Trevor Lewis, maybe adds a bit of that. I mean, 6'1", 205. But even then, like I think Nathan Beaulieu is the guy that would step in and fight somebody. Whatever it was. I mean, you just need. It seems that teams need a guy like that. And
Well, you don't want it to be Wheeler.
no, well, that's it, right? You don't want him. You don't want Nikolai Ehlers trying to go after Jamie Benn. Like those are the types of things you don't want to see. So yeah, it'll be interesting. But Nathan Beaulieu has the inside track on that third pairing job. It's going to be interesting to see how it kind of plays out with both Sandberg and Heinlein. I think Sandberg's probably got the edge because he's going to be in training camp. But it'll be interesting to see.
All right, Scott. Well, it is going to be a very interesting training camp. It's going to be a fun next 10, 12 days until we get ready for a season. And then it's going to be a sprint after that. Been a while since we got to talk about hockey. Good to do that again. Happy New Year to you and to everyone out there. And we'll be back with lots more of this jet setting as the season goes along.